Hey, what's up everybody? Two questions that I get asked a lot are, what is your live performance setup with the NuRAD, and what's with the Wii Remote? Those questions are obviously very related, so in this video I'm going to show you my Ableton live session with my live performing setup, and I'll show you a little bit of what the Wii Remote is doing and how it works. This live rig has gone through a bunch of different iterations, by the way. I've been performing with motion controls in the Wii Remote since like 2019, and the very first rig that I made was with Mainstage. Since then I've switched to Ableton, which gives me a little bit better access to recording, not to mention a lot of Max MSP, Max for Live functionality, which as you'll see is a pretty significant part of my live performing setup. So there's been a bunch of different Ableton versions as well, but this one is the first one that I'm like really happy with, and the main difference is that it uses a plugin called Unify, which does a lot of heavy lifting here. Let's start by opening up Unify so that we can take a look. Unify is basically a plugin that will host all your other plugins in like whatever combination you want, and also gives you direct access to all of those plugins parameters so that you can control them with macros or MIDI messages, which is hugely important to me. Honestly, the way that I use Unify doesn't even scratch the surface of what it's capable of. This thing is insanely powerful. It's almost like a DAW in and of itself. And if you're interested in digital music or music production of any sort, then I highly recommend that you check it out because this thing is incredible. So let's take a look at the macros. I'm basically only using two macros here, and one of them is connected to the tilt control on my Wiimote. That's CC12 or macro 1 over here. And this basically just tells my synths to do mod wheel vibrato. So any synth that I have loaded up in here, if I tilt my instrument up, I'll get some vibrato. This took a little bit of work to set up, but because I'm doing it in Unify, I don't have a giant list of MIDI mappings for each individual synthesizer in my MIDI mapping list in Ableton, which for previous versions of this live rig was huge. It was dozens upon dozens of MIDI mappings, and it was really hard to manage. So Unify kind of helps me keep that under control a little bit. The other macro that I'm using is macro number 3, which is being controlled by CC number 4, which is the lip sensor on my NuRAD. Basically, what this does is it adjusts the amount of glide or portamento in my synthesizer. Here's a quick demonstration. This isn't something that I use a lot, but I really appreciate that that expression is there if I do want to use it. So the other thing that Unify does that I really appreciate is it has this really awesome patch management system that uses program change messages. So I won't get too much into the details, but essentially you can set it up so that if Unify receives a program change message, it will look in its file structure for a text file that I've created that will tell it what patch to select in its library based on the program change message that it gets. So this is really cool because I can have a big list of patches in these MIDI clips. So if I click play on any one of these MIDI clips, it will send a program change message to Unify telling it to select the strictly FM patch, which is activated by program message 54. So this took a little bit of setting up, but it's great because I can just select any sound by clicking on these MIDI messages without having to open up the Unify interface. Just to prove to you that it works, let's open up Unify. I want my Swelchy patch. Bam, there it is. I want my Disco Saw patch. Bam, there it is. So the other really cool thing about this is that I can also send it random program change messages. So I created this little Max for Live device that will just send a random program change message. So I can hit this button and it'll just randomly select a patch in my library. So there's Cheesy Pad, there's Dragon, there's Driven Waves. This is a really fun way to just kind of get to know my current sound library, which right now is, I think it's like 96 sounds or something like that. So if I'm just practicing or playing along with recordings, I can just hit this and I'll get a random sound and I'll just get to know it a little bit better that way. By the way, right now my library consists of patches that I made for Unify, Electro Winds Volume 1, and patches for Serum by The Art of Windsynth. I'll definitely expand on this in the future, but you know, for now, that's 94 patches, 96 patches, and that's about all I can handle. The cool thing though is that I can make a version of this. I can just replace Unify with any VST that I want, or I can add a new track over here and have all of the same stuff and just arm this track instead. So if I want to have, say, a Respiro setup that has different effects, I can just set that up really easily. Anyway, that's Unify, which is basically the sound engine, or at least the thing that holds the sound engines for this rig. Now I think we'll just go through my instrument rack from left to right, and I'll just tell you everything that's going on in there. So first up is Multimapper 32. So Unify was in charge of the tilt function of my Wii Remote. Multimapper is in charge of the roll function of my Wii Remote. Multimapper 32, by the way, is a Max for Live device, and it's really good. I didn't make it. So if I open this mapping tab, you can see all the things that I have this map to. Basically, the top row is roll to the left, and the bottom row is roll to the right. So roll to the left, I have mapped to random chance, AM distortion, auto pan rate, and auto pan amount. And then roll to the right is basically just my harmonizer. We'll get into all those things a little bit later in this video. First, I just want to show you the expression curves and kind of how that works. So the little black line that you see, that's the current position of my Wii Remote. And as soon as that intersects with one of those glowy blue lines, MIDI CC values are sent to whatever each of these macros is mapped to. So as you can see, each of these lines is a little bit differently shaped. The angle's slightly different depending on like how quickly I want that effect to fade in or how sensitive I want it to be. And the really important thing is if I'm holding my NuRAD in a neutral playing position, that black line isn't intersecting with any of these blue lines, so nothing is being activated until it crosses a certain threshold. I think it's pretty important that motion controls are customizable in this way. Different people move different amounts when they're playing and like want their instrument to respond in certain ways. So Multimapper 32 just gives me all the control I could ever want over any motion control coming from any instrument, whether it's, you know, the NuRAD and my Wii Remote or the Arty Noise Recorder, which I quite enjoy playing. So next up is expression control. We'll come back to this because I'm just using it for the key track function, which has something to do with an audio effect, which is a little bit later down the line. So let's skip to note echo. Note echo is a really cool MIDI effect. Basically, it's like delay, but for MIDI. So it happens before the MIDI gets to the synthesizer, and I can activate it by hitting the A button on my Wii Remote. So here's what it sounds like. So it's like kind of a squiggly effect, and it sounds really good with delay. So again, it's not something that I'm going to use for every song and every show, but it's something that I just like to have, which is why it's mapped to a button on my instrument. Next up is random. This is super silly. I can activate it by hitting the B button on my Wiimote. And basically what that does is if I turn my instrument a certain amount to the left, it increases the chance that it will play a note other than the one that I'm playing. That can get pretty silly. Whether or not it's musical is, you know, it's really up for debate and personal taste, but I'm amused by it and I like that it's here. Here's a little demo. Anyway, that's fun. Next up, CC converter. This one's not nearly as exciting, but some of my patches don't respond to CC number 2, which is the MIDI CC value that's typically associated with breath control, and instead they respond to aftertouch. So basically, if I want to play one of those sounds, I just need to hit the home button, and then CC2 will be converted to aftertouch, and I'm good to go. So next up is my random program change device. I already explained that to you. So let's move on to this guy. So this is a Max for Live device that I made that controls my harmonizer, which is a Max for Live device that somebody else made that I modified a little bit. So my harmonizer lives over here in this return track, and it's a modified version of the Denpa Harmonizer, which is a free device made by Denpa Studios, and you can download it on maxforlive.com. I reached out to Denpa Studios, basically just asking if it would be okay if I showed off these modifications that I made to their device, and their email's not in service, so I wasn't able to get in touch with them, but hopefully they don't mind. This is a free device anyway, so anybody can download it and open it up in Max MSP or Max for Live and see how it works and do these same modifications that I did. So if y'all are interested in this, I might make another video about it. But yeah, here's what I did. Basically, I made it so that this device is now MIDI reactive and it will always harmonize in the key that I select. The thing about the old version was that you could set it up to play certain intervals, but those intervals wouldn't change to fit the key that you're playing. So if you set it up to play a major third, it would always be a major third, even if that note was outside of the key that you were in. So basically what I've done is I created this device, which basically tells the Denpa Harmonizer what key I'm in and how to modify the interval so that it stays in the key. So I can select the key using my LPD8, that just tells the other device what key I'm playing in, and then over here, I can select which interval I want it to play by hitting these pads on my LPD8. So say I want it to play thirds, I can hit that one, or if I want it to play fourths and sixths, then I can hit those two. So just for fun, let's open up my Denpa device. Get it, because it controls the Denpa Harmonizer. I've gotten really into Max MSP recently. Such a cool piece of software. So here it is in presentation mode. If we blow it up a little bit, you can see that it's receiving MIDI from Ableton. Most of it is getting passed, but the MIDI note information is being passed through, and basically I'm just doing some math to it so that it will select the note in the scale and play the appropriate interval. This key change thing over here, that's just adding negative numbers to these values so that the math works out no matter what key I'm playing in. There's 12 notes in music, of course, so I've got 12 different values, 0 to 11, and I will just add a negative number for each semitone that we go up from the key of C, and then all the math works out. Anyway, if we take a look at this modified version of the Denpa Harmonizer that I made, these dials will change position depending on what note I'm playing in the scale. Because it's all controlled by MIDI, it's very low latency because there's no pitch detection algorithm involved. For that reason, it is the least latent harmonizer I've ever used. Unfortunately, because it's controlled by MIDI, it's really only useful if you're playing a monophonic synthesizer that you want to harmonize. So great for electronic wind instrument players, not so great if you're a singer or a guitar player. Anyway, that's my harmonizer. I'm really stoked about it. Let's take a look at the audio effects. So first up is this little AM distortion thing that I made, and it basically consists of 3 different devices, 2 Ableton devices and one that I got from maxforlive.com, and this is where the expression control MIDI device comes in. So what we're doing here is we're taking this LFO, which is set to 40 Hertz, and we're multiplying it by the value of the note that I'm playing, which is where the key track thing comes in, and then we're taking that value and we're making the threshold of the compressor go up and down at that speed. Because we're always multiplying 40 Hertz, by a key tracked value, the amplitude modulation is always going to be related to the note that I'm playing on my NuRAD. So it's always going to sound good. And then, as you could probably tell, the dry-wet of the compressor is just being controlled by the angle at which I hold my instrument. So yeah, essentially what this does is it uses amplitude modulation to give me a nice little growly effect. Pretty silly use of a compressor, but hey, it works. So next up is auto pan, and I'm using this sort of as a tremolo effect, which is kind of like my AM distortion effect, but much slower. So both of these effects, by the way, are activated by buttons 1 and 2 on my Wii Remote. So if I want to use the slow tremolo, it's probably a good idea to deactivate the amplitude modulation distortion first. Anyway, this auto pan is tied to the rate of my Ableton project, which I can control with tap tempo on my LPD8. This is really good for like glitchy rhythmic effects, and it's something that I like to combine with glide a lot. So that's that device. Next up, really boring, this is utility. It's doing 2 things. Basically, it's just taking the left channel and getting rid of the right one so that it's sending a mono signal. So basically, if I have any stereo effects that are built into the patches that I'm using, I won't have any destructive interference because I'm only using one channel. The other thing is, a little volume control. Not all my patches are the same volume, which is something that I should fix. But I'm a little bit too lazy to do that, so I just kind of fix it on the fly by using this gain control, which is mapped to a knob on my LPD8. And then finally, just in case things get really loud, I have a limiter. And yeah, that's pretty much it. That's how I play live on the NuRAD. Or, at the very least, this is like a template that I can use and change depending on what I need to do live for any given show on the NuRAD. I'd love to see all of these effects and sounds built into an instrument, because, Ableton's great, and I have a pretty good laptop, but at the same time, if it was all built into an instrument, that would be really awesome. So if there are any digital wind instrument manufacturers out there, let's get this happening. That's it for this video. I hope you found it to be helpful, or at least interesting. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.